I'd like to welcome and thank you for joining us for our May Conservation Journeys webinar, Bears and Fire in the Carolinas. Before we get started, folks, just a couple quick housekeeping notes. Please click on speaker view in the upper right-hand corner for best viewing experience today. We're also going to be using the poll function throughout today's webinar and would encourage you to participate. Of course, if at any point during the webinar you have a question, please put it in the chat. We'll be saving questions until the end of the webinar and we'll do our best to address them all. That's it for housekeeping notes. To all of our TNC members on today's call, thank you for supporting our work and the efforts that you're going to learn more about today. And if you aren't a TNC member yet, we hope that today's webinar will inspire you to support the good work that the Conservancy is doing, focusing on forest restoration here in the Southeast. I met Adam Warwick after I started working for the South Carolina chapter's Southern Blue Ridge office based in Greenville, South Carolina. Now, while Adam works for the North Carolina chapter, his office based in Asheville is actually the closest TNC office to our base here in Greenville. And that's one of the reasons why TNC's approach to conservation works. With chapters in all 50 states and operations in 79 countries abroad, we know that nature knows no boundaries, and we're able to really take advantage of that by having offices and personnel across the United States and across the globe. TNC operates on a whole systems approach, and Adam and his colleagues in North Carolina, along with our team here in South Carolina, work on the Southern Blue Ridge whole system to maximize our efforts to share scientific findings and execute projects aimed at creating a world where people and nature thrive together. Well, let's get started. Adam Warwick is a wildlife biologist with over 18 years of experience. He has served as the stewardship manager for the Nature Conservancy's Southern Blue Ridge program since 2012. Adam leads TNC's land management and restoration work in Western North Carolina. As Adam prepares to get started, real quick, we'd just love to know where everyone's calling from today. If you have a minute, just type into the chat where you're calling from. We'd love to know where you are. Looks like we have a true representation of folks from the mountains to the sea, Johns Island, Somerville, TR, just up the road. Taylor's, hey, I'm calling from Taylor's today as well. Welcome, Jess. Down the coast in Bluffton and right in the middle part of the state here. And that's, again, the great thing about TNC's approach is to work with our members across the state to accomplish good conservation work. Thank you, everyone. Adam, let's hear more about bears and fire here in the Carolinas.
Alrighty, thanks for having me. Can you hear me okay, Ryan?
Yes, I can.
Okay, cool. All right, well, thanks for having me. I love talking about bears. I spent several years, before I joined the Nature Conservancy 8 years ago. I worked for 9 years in Florida, and when I got done with school, I didn't necessarily seek out to work with bears. I just, in our profession, sometimes you got to just go where the job is, and so that took me to the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission, and got there, and I guess it was first or second day on the job. I was the guy that was my boss took me out and took me to a bee apiary, or a place where the beehives were down there on the Apalachicola National Forest. If you know where that is, it's very similar to the South Carolina low country. And we showed up at the bee yard, and sure enough, there's a 7-foot hole dug underneath this electric fencing. The beekeepers had to have electric fencing in the forest to keep the bears out. And as you may or may not know, that Apalachicola National Forest is like where the Tupelo honey comes from, which is just the best honey you've ever had. But yeah, he was there. We got out there, and it was pretty much like, hey, you're going to be working on bears now, so this is how you trap one. And I think that was the extent of my training. So I just dove right into bear work and started just living in Florida and fishing and learning about fire. And I had a blast. And now I'm in the mountains, the Southern Appalachians, just because, the heat and humidity, I couldn't do it anymore. That 9 month long summer that they have down there, I just couldn't couldn't do it. I needed my seasons back. I grew up in East Tennessee, and so this is living in Western North Carolina as home, and certainly I get down to the upstate and I have a blast exploring the natural areas and working with Kristen Austin and Devin Yateman in the Greenville office and Ryan. So I was a biologist down there, and I, in Florida, the North Florida, this place, kind of near Tallahassee, near Apalachicola, the town of Apalachicola, and Florida, they quit hunting bears many years ago. The state government got sued, and the environmental group said, you can't keep hunting these bears. You don't even know how many there are, and it's actually a subspecies. It's called the Florida black bear, and it's just a different species. It's got some genetic differences, and so they stopped hunting and really started to assess the bear population and really handled the bear population, I think, with kid gloves is how I'd call it. We would go out and get road kills at 3 o'clock in the morning, collect data. We would respond to every time a resident called, or not every time, but when the bear was doing getting too close to people or something, and we would trap and move bears. We've learned, as I'll get into, we've learned about the sort of the downsides of trapping and moving bears, but this was a bear that went into downtown Tallahassee one time, and it was one of my first experiences. It was really early on, and in a live oak tree, and I had to dart that one and get the fire department to come out and catch him, in one of those things, when people jump out of windows, and I don't know if the fire department still does that, but that's what you think of. That's what they brought out, and we caught the bear and moved him back to bear happy land. That's which is what we called sort of when you take them back out to Apalachicola National Forest, bear happy land. But there's one of the bee yards that would produce the Tupelo honey, and that's what the bears would do on occasion. They would dig a massive trench to get to the bee larvae, which is funny. People think that they're after the honey, but they're in fact after the larvae, because they're so rich in calories, and there's just so much protein. So I'd go out there and set traps, and then put ear tags in them and give them a lip tattoo. That green ink is just what we would use to try to give them a lip tattoo. So and I got to just study them, have them in hand, and see all different sizes from little cubs to others. And about 6 years in, I think this was in about 2009, we had this it wasn't uncommon for us to have for people to say, I was out fishing and I saw a bear swimming, and it happened on occasion. They would swim to some of our barrier islands, like St. George Island. But it's a really cool place, an interesting place for bears, Florida, and a lot of dynamics that are real similar to down east in South Carolina. They're right there around the Myrtle Beach area, and I'll get into that as well. But the black bears historically, before European settlement, was ubiquitous. This was the former range. If you were to go back about 300 or 400 years ago, this is where you would generally be able to find bears. And then today it looks much more like this. Scattered populations. They've been rebounding. Right at the sort of the turn of the century, when we were really building our country, and our wood demand was so high. We just wrecked our forests. They all look like this. And when we were finished with them, the Southern Appalachians into the South Carolina coast, whether it might have been turpentine from pine trees down near All's Way, or spruce fir up this way for railroad building and shipbuilding and things like that. It ran the gamut, but that really started to decimate the bear population, and excuse me, many other wildlife species that have since some recovered, some not. A closer look sort of at the southeastern bear populations, and you kind of see where sort of South Carolina fits in population numbers. A decent size, 500, 600 bears in the in the upstate of South Carolina, and probably about 200 or 300 out on the coast. And then you just jump up into North Carolina, which is obviously a much bigger state, and we have a pile of bears. They do well in the mountains, and they do fantastically well at the southeast North Carolina coast, and that sort of spills over. That population sort of feeds the South Carolina population. There's some dispersal down that Waccamaw River corridor, because right up on that North Carolina side, there's just a tremendous amount of cornfields in it. And in fact, that county, Craven County, is where the world record actually comes from. It's about real close to 900-pound bear. So they just get massive out there on the coast. Yeah, so you got a mountains and a coastal population, and you can tell that the way that South Carolina DNR labels this map, bears have been in every county. And I talked to some biologists the other day about the South Carolina bear population, and just to kind of compare notes, and they come through every county. All these counties that surround the mountains, they'll pop up here and there, but this is where you would sort of classify as what the core populations are. And they're very different. By the best estimates, from back in the 1990s, this was about what the bear population looked like, or the numbers. And so then today, that mountain population has increased. And although this has a sort of a stable chart there, it's kind of up and down on the coast. It varies, I think, pretty widely, depending on several factors that I'll get into. But the Lewis Ocean Bay Heritage Preserve is a really key place for bears on the coast, and Carter's Bay as well, and Waccamaw, that river corridor is some of the best remaining habitat that we have left down there. And you know what it looks like. This was sort of the habitat I worked in Florida, which is longleaf pine, mixed pine, flatwoods, and in Florida, this saw palmetto was a fantastic bear food. In fact, we would there was a point there where we were really getting really concerned, and we still are, just because people will poach the saw palmetto berries for medicinal purposes. And so there's real concern about how that impacts the bear population. Saw palmetto doesn't grow that far north, but you do have obviously the pine flatwoods, and that's part of the habitat that they are part of the area that they live in. More specifically, this is what I picture as good bear habitat. Kind of swampy. It's got tupelo berries. It's got all different kinds of food sources. Very diverse. So there's insects, plenty of insects out there. There's vegetation, blackberries and raspberries, and all different kinds of berries throughout the summer. So it really makes for pretty good bear habitat and lots of denning opportunities. Up here in the Appalachians and in upstate South Carolina and others, it's in a dry mesic oak forest, or ideally a mixed oak hickory forest. That's what we mostly had here. I guess up until 110 years ago or so, we had chestnut was certainly a big part of our forests. And really there's just probably been no more devastating impact to our forests in the United States as the loss of the chestnut back then. It was the wildlife food in the Southern Appalachians. It was people depended on it. It was vital to early economy, and the stories about the size of the bears and the bear population are, there's plenty of stories out there about how abundant all wildlife were when there was chestnut. That's kind of the saying that's been handed down. One thing that I work on nowadays with TNC is I made that switch from Florida Fish and Wildlife, which was a great job for a wildlife biologist, and it's a dream job really, because I got to, get my hands on animals, and that's kind of what you get in it for. You get in the job for is the cool stuff like that. But I moved up here because I saw an opportunity. I started to realize that there wasn't a real shortage of talented and just passionate wildlife biologists that wanted to work on specific animals. But I got a glimpse of sort of what the Nature Conservancy is all about, and that's what I realized about bears. It's so much about the habitat. It's about the food and the cover. With bears, it's mostly the food, but it's all what our wildlife populations are like in the future. Is going to be a result of how we manage our places today and how much we can possibly protect and conserve from becoming development or other things. It's critical to not just bears, but certainly a ton of wildlife species. I'll tell you some some of these fast facts about bears, and we can spin through this, and you can post questions in that chat box. And Ryan's I told him he can interrupt me anytime and say, hey, I got a question. Otherwise, males, it's a little shorter lifespan for males. They tend to do things to get in trouble, more likely to. They disperse farther. The females, they have a much larger home range. So in general, that would mean they just come in contact with more hunters and more vehicles. And so that's really the limiting factor on bears in most cases. That's their sort of primary mortality. But most of them live less than 20 years, no matter what. An old bear would be 20, 25 years. Most of them die before they reach, the majority of them die before, the way the main time that the most bears die is between 0 and 1 years old. Ultimately, like I said, survivorship is just lower in males because they're just more mobile. Females tend to stay in the same place generally. Their home range size, the males have a huge home range. They cover a lot of territory. They're chasing the females during breeding, and they're just always on the move. They can be a little bit nomadic. And so there's the comparison of the home range size. So for perspective, a female's home range size is about the size of Table Rock State Park, whereas a male home range is about the size of Mountain Bridge Wilderness Area. So just about, I think in a yearly cycle, that's about the sometimes the terrain or the amount of acreage that the bear would cover to meet all the food needs. They kind of just follow the food. You'll find out that's the food is the recurring theme throughout my presentation. It's nowhere more evident than downtown Asheville. It's fascinating. The Wildlife Commission here and North Carolina State University have been studying these urban bears for several years now, and 7-8 years at least. So and so they catch them in the backyard. They catch them in people's backyard, the way I used to catch them in a trap in Florida, and they will put radio collars on them. Now they have satellite collars, so it pings up a satellite when they have that collar on, and it pings up the location, and then the satellite, of course, beams it back to your computer. And so you get about, depending on how the setting you make, you get a location of a bear each day. Thus, in this photo, the different colors would represent different bears. So this red bear, these red dots, these red groups of dots are not the same bears. They are those are different bears. So you have multiple colors in here, and many more bears than what's represented here. But the interesting, sort of the key take home with this picture is like those home range sizes are sort of based on natural setting. But when bears start living around people, their home range size shrinks significantly because they don't have to go very far to meet all their food needs and even their cover needs in some cases. They just essentially hang out in the woods during the day and then go out and hit garbage cans at night and other types of human provided foods, and it really affects the bear population. The definition, when you're talking about any wildlife species, I think this is always so important to really consider. When we talk about habitat, it's that collection of resources a particular species needs. So black bear habitat is different from raccoon habitat. It's different from a cardinal habitat. And so in its very basic level, we attract certain species, wildlife species, to our home by either providing habitat or enhancing it. Bird feeders, for example, bears love bird seeds. They're one of their natural foods. And so we deter species around our home by just taking away those resources, right? That's the essence of bear management, really. It's not really rocket science. So even, you're providing habitat theoretically when you put a deer feeder in the woods near the hunting stand, or you continually let the bear get in garbage, or you let them get in the bird feeders. It's entertaining as it can be. I can admit to having a blast watching bears do this. We don't do them any favors, but by doing that, but we'll talk a little bit about why. Bears, it's funny with that home range, it's sort of the same thing. They're kind of territorial, but the more food there is available, the more that they will tolerate each other. Clearly, these are grizzlies, and they'll get in fights when they get in each other's sort of personal space. But when the salmon are running in Alaska, it's not uncommon to find a situation like this where it's just bears tolerating each other, being just virtually on top of one another. When I was in Florida, I lived in this town called Carabel, and we had bear problems all the time. In the fall, they would come down and get in these live oak trees when the acorns were on. Live oak's a type of white oak, and so the acorns are like, since chestnuts are gone, these white oak acorns are like sort of one of the wildlife staples that we have to have. They're just a form of a mast, what we call mast. So, but they would come down, and we called them Carabel Christmas ornaments, because you would find 6 or 7 bears in a tree at a time if it was a tree with a lot of acorns. And interesting thing about acorns and oaks is, they found that certain trees just produce more acorns. Some oak trees don't ever produce an acorn. And generally speaking, the individual trees across the forest of the same species will differ in how many acorns they produce. And invariably, or undoubtedly, bears know that. Bears just inherently know these trees. But yeah, those are Carabel Christmas ornaments. Male bears get bigger. About the biggest in South Carolina goes about, I think, 350 pounds, and the South Carolina female average tops out at about 150. And I talked about that Craven County record. So that's just a massive bear that they got really healthy on corn and hog farms. Maybe the scraps and the feed from hog farms. The corn is obviously exported some, but it's grown to supplement the feed at the hog farms that are so numerous in North Carolina, eastern North Carolina. Their sense of smell is like what really gets them in trouble. I think it's so strong. And it's why, when you go camping in places with bears, they talk about these containers and things like that. I don't know that those are enough really I guess they're enough to keep a bear from far off from tracking down where that food smell is coming from, but they know where those containers aren't smell proof, and they smell food in a tin can. They just got amazing sense of smell, and it's because of the surface area in their sinuses. It looks like this. I have some skulls at home that I use when I teach in person, but it's just the surface area of their sinuses is just it's 100 times more than what we have. So they smell food. You can't hide food from a bear. It's just not It's not, he's gonna find it if he can smell it. They've got pretty good hearing. They're a little bit nearsighted, but they have a large brain and a excellent long-term memory. We've moved bears as far as 350 miles away and relocated to trouble nuisance bears or bears that were causing problems, and they'll come back 350 miles to where we caught them. And so when I was in, in 2008, I had this situation. This, as I was saying earlier, it's not uncommon for the bears to swim offshore. And our law enforcement folks, they sort of stumbled across this one day and followed him around for a little bit, and he went ahead and went on shore. This is an area you may or may not be familiar with, the Panhandle. So if Apalachicola is to the left of your screen and Tallahassee is to the top right of your screen, this is down here on the coast near a town called Panacea, and this is like where that bear went on shore, sort of at this end where it's like Bald Point State Park. And so it's one of those sort of beach type, that Alligator Point is one of those, this area is one of those beach type, barrier island type places. You have a bay on one side and one street going down the middle. This is a very, very narrow, so you can tell not a lot of bear habitat or what you would think of it. But that bear that went on shore, he would, they told us he had ear tags, so we knew he had been caught before, and he was kind of going from house to house and getting in garbage, going, because those beach houses are up on pilings, and so everybody keeps their garbage down low, and so it's like the bears have it perfect. This one, for reference, this bear goes 375 pounds. So you see the folks back there on the beach side, and yeah, you'd come up on him, and he was neck deep in trash, and I had been getting calls for a couple of weeks saying, hey, this bear, he's just going from house to house and he's got ear tags. And having caught bears before, I know how smart they are. And so you can catch them once, and if they're super, super hungry, you might be able to catch him again. But I knew he was just gonna keep going from house to house, so I didn't know where to set the trap. So I was training the fella, and we just went out there and decided darting him would be the way to go. We would dart him, he would run a little bit, and he would fall down, and we'd go pick him up and put him in the truck, and then figure out what to do with him. So we darted him, and it was just like normal when we dart an animal, a bear. If they're in a trap, that's ideal, but it's 5-10 minutes, and they kind of slowly lose mobility. They don't really go to sleep. They just can't move their limbs. And so, normally when you're trying to dart one, you sort of aim for the muscle. So perhaps that one hit fat or something. I don't know, but it took forever for this bear to really go down and become immobilized. And he went out near the street, like right down, we darted him under this, I think it was this house with the purple roof, and he went from house to house and then out towards the road. And then he went ahead and crossed the road onto the bayside. And so he was going to swim across that bay. I don't know, 4 or 5 miles probably is, but I was really worried because I knew those, well, I figured those drugs were going to kick in at some point. But back to the bear stuff. The facts about bears, they're highly intelligent, and I've seen them use tools, which is a really advanced sort of crows can or sort of have advanced brains and can use tools, but I have seen bears use things as tools to accomplish a particular task. So excellent long-term memory, like excellent navigation, awesome sense of smell. And so all that stuff, all those facts are really just why, trapping or darting and relocating bears is just not a real a viable solution.
Hey Adam, hey
Yeah.
Adam, it's so interesting just learning more about bears and just the intelligence that they have with them. Do want to take a moment real quick to give you a chance to have a swig of water, and let's throw up a poll question here and see if folks have learned anything so far or any thoughts. So you walk outside on your porch and notice a bear down the yard. The bear stands up on its hind legs, nearly 8 feet tall. What's your next move? Run back in the house, play dead, throw a Bojangles biscuit with honey, of course, away from the house, chase the bear, or make loud noises, yell, and admonish the bear like you would your dog? Answer away.
This is fun. I haven't done the poll stuff very often, so this is cool.
All right, looks like we have some answers in.
Yep.
All right. Well, it looks like I don't know if there's maybe a totally right or wrong answer here. You could certainly run back in the house, but what Adam and our other colleagues would tell you to do, of course, is to make loud noises and yell and admonish the bear like you would your dog. Somebody in this Zoom call today is willing to share a Bojangles biscuit, which you're a better person than I am. I'd be saving that for myself. So very good there. And Adam, I guess while we're just taking a break here before we get on the rest of the presentation, we've had several questions come in. I'd love to just address a couple of them right now. And one came from a local celebrity we have here on the day's call, TNC's former state director in South Carolina, Mark Robertson. He's enjoying retirement now after several decades with TNC. But Mark asked, do both South Carolina and North Carolina allow bear hunting, both in the mountains and the coast areas?
Yeah, that's a good question. Hey, Mark. Yeah, they do. Both of them. The harvests really change. It's really tough, especially on South Carolina biologists, because see what sets up the scenario, and I'll show it to you in a minute. Bears are doing really well in urban areas where we do not hunt. Bears are doing okay in the national forests and the undeveloped areas where we're hunting, where the hunting is. And so it's a challenge to set a harvest limit, because you're trying to find that middle ground, that sort of carrying capacity where there's not so many that they're just pouring into people's trash like they are in Asheville, and you find that balance of what's acceptable to the public and what's ecologically sustainable. And it depends on the area too as to what people are willing to tolerate. But yeah, that's a long way to say, yeah, we have harvests across North Carolina and across South Carolina. They just they differ a little bit in how in the pressure and kind of how the hunt goes.
Thanks, Adam. And Jess also asked just a quick follow-up to that. Is bear hunting then needed to control the population in both North Carolina and South Carolina, or is she just asked if it's unnecessary?
The question, the answer is yes. The only one that's sort of possibly not is that South Carolina coastal population. Yeah, the way it is with food and bears is it's directly proportional. They're just going to have, in Asheville where they're eating well, these bears are having 5 cubs. Every study in a natural forest or conservation area up till now has shown the average is 2, and only 1 of those usually survives. And so we are creating bear sanctuaries in our urban areas. They don't get hunted, and they have unlimited food supply. So it's really, so I think, there has to be something we figure out as far as hunting on and possibly harvest on the periphery of these areas. I think the bears are so gentle and docile, it's a wonder that there's not more. I think if you understood the volume, I think of people that interact with bears on a daily basis, the statistics would show you kind of how, they're going to avoid a confrontation with a human, but invariably there's going to be people that don't like bears. There's going to be have some bad interactions. And after I left Florida, a young lady got bit one night. You never know the circumstances, because it's just not like bears to stalk a person, or they don't want to eat meat. They don't eat much meat. So I think in some ways hunting is needed to really manage these populations, and it's a trick, because you have ones a lot of times dispersing from natural areas and going into urban areas and boosting those populations. So it's tricky.
For sure. Well, thank you, Adam. Thank you for the questions. Please keep them coming in. We'll jump back in this presentation because Dave has a question that says, what happened to the alligator point bear? And Dave, I think that Adam's going to answer that here shortly as we continue on this conservation journey. And it's quite an interesting story.
Yeah, it is. I do the little cliffhanger there. That's my effort for a cliffhanger. And so basically, when you watch these bears, their behavior is fascinating, so pretty much the head is the indicator of the bear's disposition or mood. And they have many different moods and ways of being and levels of comfort with humans. And hence the question, the bear is in the backyard and he's 8 feet tall and he's standing up on his hind legs. And I used to get calls all the time that said, "Hey, this bear was standing up and being aggressive," when in fact it's like the head position again is the most important indicator of his disposition. And really, when they stand up, they're curious what you actually are, usually, or whatever they're looking at. They're trying to get better smell because the air movement's a little better. If they're downwind or upwind, they just got such a good sense of smell, and they can see better. They're like I said, they're nearsighted, so it helps them. They get up, and I'll say, "Hey, that's more like curious." Now, when what you would consider aggressive is sort of when the head dips below the shoulders, and it's like not unlike a dog, where a dog's about to snap at you. Their ears get pinned back, and you just know. It's the same way with bears. If you're ever in really close with them, they'll do the jaw clicking. It's like this, the sound you would make clicking your teeth together. They kind of chomp their jaws, and it makes a sort of a deep sort of clicking noise and chomping noises, and they'll blow. They'll kind of go. And that's just more, rather than attacking, it's more like, back up. I'm getting uncomfortable. Or to put it another way, he would say, my need for safety and security is not being met, and I feel perplexed and fearful because I'm unsure whether you are an animal that will eat me. So maybe he might choose to say it that way. Or in this case, my need for safety is not being met. So I feel anxious, fearful, aggravated because I am not sure if you will harm me and we are too close to one another. So you nonviolent communication readers might get that. Others might be like, what the heck was that? So it's like a rattlesnake would rattle. They slap the ground. They'll reach up and they'll slap a tree. They'll kind of blow or woof, and it's all just bluffing because those attacks on people are so rare. Now, when you're an idiot and you do idiot type things, then it's when, like at Cades Cove, what you would expect to happen at Cades Cove is, it's a video, it's online somewhere, but her cubs are right there. Well, actually, you can see the one in the picture, the side of the picture there. So they're crossing the road, and those mother bears are very protected, and that changes the aggression of the adult male bear quite a bit. And so, climbing trees and running away, that's all submissive behavior. What you have to understand about the difference between grizzlies and black bears is, black bears just evolved in this eastern hardwood forest, and so they adapted to be able to climb trees as to escape, because historically there was other animals, other predators out there that were a threat to bears. But certainly the behavior hasn't disappeared, and they do that when they want to retreat. They climb trees. That's just an act of sort of submission. And so um, these bears on the coast and the mountains, they share very similar foods. It's usually a distinct set. There's some differences here and there, but certainly the berry crops are real critical to bears. As the berries and oak acorn, mostly the berries, as the berries fluctuate, so does the bear response to that of the population. And so, whereas up here, the bears, evolved in this mixed oak, hickory, hardwood forest that was historically open when it burned. Excuse me, it was more open when it burned regularly. Historically, today, and it facilitated, I guess it was conducive to the growth of much more herbaceous vegetation and shrubs, and blueberries and things that bears eat. Blackberries, if you know where blackberries grow, they grow in the open, and blueberries put on a lot more berries. And so indigenous people knew that, and they, of course, used fire to promote the plants that they needed. But we for so long now we've suppressed fire, and we've gotten really good at, once the fire gets started, we get out there and stomp it out. It's the Forest Service and California, and it just spends billions and billions of dollars now on that very thing. So in doing so, we have a much more closed forest and very little sunlight. Usually it's about 95% canopy cover or more, and very little sunlight reaches the forest floor. So you have ferns and a lot of some diversity, but a lot of the sun-loving species are gone. And then in the mid-story, underneath the canopy, you have dense rhododendron. Rhododendron's real sensitive to fire, so in the absence of fire, it's just it's expanded out of the sort of the riverside areas, the riparian areas, and it's just really taken over our forest. So it's really depressing, because underneath these rhododendron is habitat for really almost nothing. I mean, there's some insects in there, and certainly bears will den in thickets like this. Wood thrush, ovenbird, and some other. There's a few species, and this was present historically on the landscape. It just didn't cover so much land historically. Down in the low country, of course, they love these swamps, and that's where a lot of food is. It's in the low country where you run into challenges is when you turn it into when it's a pine plantation. It's almost the same as similar to rhododendron thicket. That's just, there's no diversity in there. There's no food. There's no sunlight. Very little sunlight getting in the interior there, and so it's a really sort of a biological desert is what I sort of call those. Now, rhododendron is not quite as bad as a plantation pine, but bears are kind of fit in this generalist group. The reason they sort of generally do well is because they have a wide range of things they'll eat, places they'll live. It's fairly general, just like possums and cardinals and crows. They're just adaptable. When I worked with red cockaded woodpeckers and other things, those are definitely the critters that TNC is really focused on providing habitat for, because they've evolved much narrower range of specific habitat components in certain ratios that are disappearing or have disappeared. In the case of the passenger pigeon and the Carolina parakeet, those are obviously extinct, but for similar reasons. The passenger pigeon was really dependent on the American chestnut, and we certainly over harvested both of those birds, and that certainly was the main cause. But today we've got great state agencies that do really well at managing hunts and things, and now the habitat is the problem. I probably couldn't find 5 northern bobwhite in the mountains. Nowadays, we just don't have it. They need a northern bobwhite quail need a habitat that's open, kind of it's an agricultural landscape, but like it's overall it's an old school agricultural landscape with field borders that grow up in shrubby grasses and some fields that are left idle in certain years and grow up in, well, what everybody would call weeds. That's what a quail needs, and we don't have that much anymore. Small farms are gone, and just industries changed. Up in North Carolina, Western North Carolina, and the Appalachians, they love denning in white oak trees. That's kind of their preferred den based on research. In South Carolina, I think these tip-up mounds are very important. I went out to the Greenville watershed with Chris and Austin and Tom and Devin the other day, and we went to this burn unit. We helped Greenville Water burn about 3 years ago, and we were looking at it, and the land manager, he said, I'm going to take y'all out there because we're trying to get them to burn more because they've got such a big old place. And he's like, I just don't think it looks good out there. I was like, and Devin and I were there burning that day, and we kind of did the burn and ran it. And yeah, he was like, it doesn't look good. And we got out there, and it was like, you had seen where the straight line wind event had come through right on the side of their watershed lake there, and blown down all these trees. And when those trees blow down, it creates habitat for amphibians, but it's also really conducive to bear dens. It makes for easy digging because the tree's been uprooted, and it creates this depression that you've no doubt seen when you've been kind of walking through the woods. But they love denning in trees here also. It provides really, really good insulation. So anytime you find sort of a limb or an old a hole like that in the Southern Appalachians especially, they can get in there, and where the rain goes in and it starts to create some decomposition on the interior of the tree, especially an old white oak will still stay standing forever. It's like 90% of those trees can be eroded or rotted away, and it'll still be putting on leaves. And then bears are such great diggers, they'll excavate down 10, 15, 20 feet down into that tree. And basically in the mountains, it's Thanksgiving to Easter. It kind of depends on how much food is available, but that's about when they den. And different bears den different amounts of time. But the denning is fascinating because they just basically shut down their body. They do all these interesting things. It's been the subject of, human studies for human benefit, as far as the way that they're able to reduce breathing and the body temperature falls, and yet they're able to get up and run, but there's several specialized body changes that occur during hibernation. But like I said, we've studied that because they can get up and run. If a person lays in bed for 3 weeks with an injury or something, humans will start to lose bone and muscle mass. But they're starting to look at that and figure out, well, what does this mean for people? Because a bear, if you go in their den, and that's when we try to, dart them and radio collar them sometimes in the winter because they're kind of out of it, but they can still pop up and take off. It's not that's not unheard of by any means. So it's pretty fascinating. But right when those cubs are born, while that female is in the den, and they're about the size of a soda can, a 12-ounce soda can, and then they basically leave that den in about April, when they're able to walk on their own and kind of follow their mom. Ryan, do you have another survey question?
Yeah, I sure do, Adam. On the coast of South Carolina, what comprises the greatest portion of a bear's diet? Garbage, corn, shrimp and grits, blackberries, acorns. And poll question number 2 is, what percentage of a bear's diet is meat? Is it 90%, 50%, 25%, or 5%?
Man, y'all gotta Nature Conservancy folks are the best. They know this stuff.
All right. Well, Adam, looks like our for question 1 here, coming in first place was acorns, and second blackberries, third place garbage, and on the percentage of a bear's diet is meat. Majority of our folks at 5%.
Yeah, that's it's all pretty much, it's spot on. They only about 5% of their diet is meat, 10% ish insects, and the rest plant material of some sort. Historically, when I read this one paper that was done back in the 70s, in fact, on that coastal population, it was mostly corn. They would, in the summer when it ripened, and in the fall, and even today, corn is still a significant part of their diet. It's close, it varies, and you'd have to measure it over a year, because as bears, bear food is so important, and as we go through a year, the bears just sort of find food. But if you don't take anything away else today, I think that the understanding of how food pretty much drives everything the bears do, that you can better list things they don't eat than the things they do, because it's the few things they don't eat. It's I think they don't like oranges or lemons. That was my takeaway. But up here, and the berry producing plants, if it produces a berry, be it pokeberries or blueberries, grapes, and what we call soft mass, that's a big part of the bear's diet, from about now and into the summer. Insects are too. Really, they in a lot of food studies, you realize how much larvae of yellow jackets that they like, and they will, and you will see I've seen one or two where you'll see in the woods where they've dug up a nest sometimes, but you could also observe them while they were getting stung by yellow jackets. Just the yellow jackets were swarming while the bear just kind of dug up the nest and was eating the larvae. They'll eat a possum or a rabbit if they come across it. They're just not very good predators. They're actually pretty bad at it. And it was, it would be evident to me when the bear would go in invariably once in a while, break in a chicken coop or something. He smelled that corn, the souring corn, and he got in there for that. And then of course the animals freak out, and then that sort of, I guess, predator instinct. So they would kill goats and chickens, but they'd only eat a little bit of it, and sometimes they would just injure the animal more so than it was almost too much trouble. But in some areas, I think, especially in those pockets of that coastal population, it's like it could be 40 to 80% human provided foods as part of their diet. It changes, and certainly in corn makes up a large portion still with the deer feeders and the farms. I know South Carolina has lost a lot of small farms, and corn has been converted to other uses. So I think that's declining over time, and it's possibly that deer feeders and other sources are making up for a little bit of that. So they emerge. Yeah.
Hey, Amos, but we got about 5 minutes left. I know we definitely want to hear the what happened at the Alligator Point bear story. Just a quick time check, and folks will have a few minutes left at the end for questions as well. See bear corn up here now. We see up here in Southern Blue Ridge all the time.
Yeah, you pop out. They pop out in spring, and this is one of the things that they really depend on. It's some folks say that it's sort of a natural laxative for them after a winter of not using the bathroom, and then they switch to summer. They go to 5,000 calories a day, really focusing on the berries as they come out one after the other, and they'll move around usually to find the different types of berries. And then in fall, of course, it switches to hard mast, and that's when the white oak acorn crop is fairly important. But it's highly variable, and it just depends on the weather conditions of the previous spring in part. You can always tell they do these measurements of how many acorns are come out each year, and it always correlates with when it's bad acorn year, hunters do better. When it's a bad acorn year, there's more vehicle collisions, and that's just because bears have to move much farther in spite to find food, and that's when they start to get into suburban areas. And when you think of the context of South Carolina, the green is protected areas, and the red is sort of not protected areas. And you know, I'll switch ahead to this Lewis Ocean Bay Preserve, because I see a lot of issues with that, and I understood about how this is what happens when you have really high quality and pretty good bear habitat next to urban areas. And so, you got Myrtle Beach right there, and other really developments where it's real tight and lots of food. And so these are the times where you have sort of some human bear conflicts. All right, I'll skip ahead and finish the story. I had a lot more stuff, but I'll maybe get to it some other time. Anyway, it went in the water, and I was like, all right, so what am I gonna do? And so I ran out that dock there as he started to swim, and I think that I was gonna make him go back towards shore. He kept swimming out there, and finally we sort of met further out there, about 20 yards from the shore. And so we went through this little time there. It's about 4 or 5 feet deep at that point where he was, and then the drugs were starting to kick in, the Tilazol, and so he was losing function and really couldn't swim. And so that's when there was some thrashing around for a few minutes, because that medicine, they just gradually lose mobility. It's not like a thing where they just all of a sudden drop like a rock. And so I was, I wrestled with the bear a little bit. I was on his back at one point, just trying to really keep his head above water until someone could come help me. But they tried with the boat, a little help. That's a buddy of mine, a couple of friends of mine, and that just kind of freaked him out. We tried again and again, but finally the bear went completely sort of immobilized, or near enough where I could escort him back to shore. So that's the story that and then we relocated the bear. We had a little the neighbor had a backhoe, and that was how we lifted, because remember, he was 375 pounds. And so that's why that picture, that one's kind of famous, and that's why it eventually sort of led to interviews and things on TV, and talk show invites, and gifts and things that people would send, just because I guess people like animals and a happy ending and things like that. So that's the bear. That's kind of my bear story and my sort of 15 minutes of fame. But I was sort of long-winded today, so I ran pretty long. And I'm happy to answer questions, or proceed however you all would like.
Right on. Our resident bear wrestler, Adam Warwick here, TNC's Land Stewardship Manager based out of the Asheville office. Thank you so much, Adam. We will have a couple questions, and any questions we don't get to, we will get you answers. We will email you answers and get those to Adam when we respect for everyone's time today. Adam, question pertains to the possibility of reintroducing key species that once roamed the Carolinas but were long ago extirpated by early settlers. Would any of these once native species be considered for reintroduction? Panthers, wolves, elk, or buffalo?
That's up to the people. More so than me. The question is, would the animals do fine? Yeah, in some cases, those are animals that need lots of room to roam, and it's really more about what we call the sort of social carrying capacity. How willing are you to live with a mountain lion if it eats a dog, a house dog occasionally, or if it tackles a child that's out for a walk? are we good with that? The buffalo, they out west, they have trouble with diseases that get passed back and forth between bison and cattle. But it's one of those grassroots things. If we want that, if that's important to us, then the past few years have shown us anything. It's just how folks can rally together for a cause and make it happen. I think we tend to think these things that government's gonna take care of us or stuff like that, and that and we just have a sense of I guess safety that but it's not. We have to do it ourselves. We have to that's why I came to work for the Nature Conservancy, because it's we're at the front of that fight where we're racing to save these elements of biodiversity that are really just really real critical. So real critical to populations, bears, and all these specialist species. So if you I think we also underestimate the power of influence of a call to a legislator. When I dealt with bear conflicts, I could be thinking, well, this is the right thing to do. But if the right person calls the right legislator and has donated enough money to that campaign, anything can get done. It's just a matter of a coalition of folks working towards a common cause. That's what it's all about.
So we'll wrap up with one question. We'll kind of marry a couple questions here together to get a final answer. But talking about bears, Linda, who lives up in the Cliffs Valley in the upstate, mentioned a bear that was hanging around their community that seemed aggressive and was on people's porches and showed no fear of humans. And another question came in just asking about any do's and don'ts for if you come across a bear or have bears in your neighborhood or near your house or home. Any suggestions or thoughts of do's, don'ts, and things to be mindful of if you have a bear near your property that's frequenting? And we talked a little bit about that during the presentation, but just any final thoughts, and we'll wrap up with that and a final poll question for today.
Yeah, it just depends on what your level of comfort is with the bears being around. You got to also consider your neighbor's level of comfort, because it might not be the same as yours. Since food drives everything that these bears do, it's really it's about what you're providing them in terms of food. It determines how many bear offspring they'll have. It determines just everything about a bear's life is driven. Decisions are sort of driven by food. So just take the food away. If you have an outdoor garbage can, put some pressure on either your local council or your waste service provider to offer you a bear-proof garbage can, or don't put it out till the day of garbage. Don't depend on bungee straps, because they're way too strong, or ratchet straps. They might work. Sometimes they work. Sometimes, most of the time, they don't. If you got a bear that's in your backyard and it's dark, don't just open the door and let your dog chase it. If you do, if that happens, it's in the past they'll corner a bear and the bear will slap the dog and the dog will be either severely injured or not killed. You can avoid that by just making a little noise, turning a light on, and and then letting your dog out, or on a leash if you're super concerned about it. Bears always want to take the easy way out, and they don't really want human provided foods, but they are going to take the easy way out, so to speak. They are going to, if you make it easy for them, like just tipping over a garbage can, there's just no reason for them to go anywhere else. And that's why their home ranges are so small around people, because they've kind of figured out it's a pretty good deal living around people. So why do I need to go out to the woods where I have to work much harder for my calories? It's all about the calories. So just, there's really no aversion techniques. We used to shoot them with rubber bullets, but if you don't take the food away, they're just going to go in the woods and hang out till we're gone, until you go to bed, and then they're going to do their thing, because it's more about the food. So look for those signs of bears just getting too comfortable around people. That's when, they've gone as far as to start breaking in cars and houses. And there's just that boundary that you got to figure out what you and your neighbors are comfortable with.
Sure.
But
Well, thank you. It all comes down to calories for the bears and for people. Always watching our calories. The bears are getting after their calories. So ironic how nature and people continue to thrive together and share similarities. Adam, gosh, thank you so much. The efforts that you and your team lead to restore our forests are an integral part of our work here in the Southeast. To all of our TNC members, thank you. The work you learned about today has your name all over it. Everything TNC accomplishes for nature is accomplished because of the support of our members. We have a final poll question today. Please take a moment to answer it. We have another webinar coming up soon. I hope everyone enjoys this warmer weather. And of course, stay on the lookout for bears. Happy trails. Take care.